Hi, I'm Amanda Webb, and welcome to Her Time, Her Place. This is a podcast about women stepping into their moment, owning their place, and sharing what it really took to get there. In each episode, I'll sit down with women from all walks of life to explore the turning points, the moments of doubt, the decisions that changed everything, the people who showed up, and the lessons they've carried forward. Because so many of us have been told, or have quietly told ourselves, that it's not the time, it's not the place, not yet. This podcast is all about questioning that, choosing it anyway, and discovering what's possible when we do. Let's go. Hello, I'm Amanda Webb, and welcome to Her Time, Her Place. This is the official first episode, and I am delighted to have Diana Ryall AM as my very first guest. Di doesn't know this, but 21 years ago is when I first met her. I was working at Deloitte at the time. It was my first job where I had responsibility for looking after diversity. Back then, that meant gender. And I met Di at that time. And then it's been 20 years exactly this year since Di did the International Women's Day keynote presentation at Deloitte. So Di, it's our 20th anniversary. I started off with Di being a role model to me back in those earlier days. From there, she's moved on to being a mentor, she's my boss, she's been a sponsor, and now I'd love to call her my friend. So today we get to hang out with a very special woman and hear a bit about her story. So Di, welcome.
Thank you very much, Amanda. It's a delight to be here and a delight for you to remind me of those 20 years, 21 years. Time, isn't it?
It is, but we don't look a day older. So
No.
It's great to be here. The tech's moved on. So back in the day, we were all face to face, but today we get to do this via tech, which is pretty cool. And that actually ties into your story as well. So Di, Her Time, Her Place is all about hearing from women, extraordinary women in my life who have traversed their own journey, been walking to the beat of their own drum, and we're going to explore a little bit about that concept of the time and the place. So let's head over to you. Can you take us through your journey, your life, from then to now, and share a bit about the Diana Ryall story?
Thank you, Amanda. I think if I look back, it's quite amazing to think of where I thought I'd be. At 17, when I left school and went to university, I was sure I'd be a teacher. I'd be a teacher for my whole life. My mother thought it was a good idea because I'd have school holidays when I had children, and I always assumed I'd have children. The first big challenge for me was when I got married and moved to the United States, and they wouldn't let me teach. So the whole path that I had laid out just disintegrated in front of me. And that made me very nervous. I was in a new country at a university town, and I had no idea what I might do. But I knew I wasn't going to be teaching. So for me, and I think this hits a number of people, all of a sudden your plan doesn't map out. And because it was a university town, if I didn't get a job in the university, then there was no work except for retail. So that really made me think, what could I do? Where could I go? And it made me take bold steps that I would never have taken. I had to go and make appointments. Bill was doing, I was married, Bill was doing postdoctorate work, but I had to make appointments in areas of the university that I just thought might have an opportunity. And one was the Department of Education, and they were starting writing computer-assisted learning. Well, we're talking about 68. I had never touched a computer, certainly never done any coding, and had no idea. And I think this is the thing, often these changes in your life, you're jumping in at the deep end with those swimming lessons. And I really came out thinking, this will never happen. It's the only job that appears to be available. And they offered me the job, really on the idea of 3 months. If you learn, you're in, and if you're not, you're out. So that was when I really accepted that if you want to learn something, if you are highly motivated, it's amazing what you can learn. And when we look at kids growing up, or women or men in jobs, you can change track. You can find new skills and you can learn on the job. And so for a year I was there, and it opened my eyes to what technology might bring. I was still thinking of education, what it would bring to schools, what it would bring when a qualified teacher wasn't available. And it was very new, and it was planned to go into the lowest schools in the US. Many years passed after that. I taught in Canada when we moved there. I taught for a short time in Australia. I worked in the Department of Education. So all of these things were very much back into government or schools or education. At the end of a year in the Department of Education, I was pregnant and my first son was born. I quit right before the baby was due. And with that quitting came a view in my mind that I would not go back into a government department. The learning for me was that I am innovative, I'm very happy to take initiative, and when people put up barriers, I'm inclined to go round them or dig under them or climb over the top of them. So I signed up to go back to university. For any of you who are mothers, Scott was born on the 3rd of March, and I started my master's degree in education that week. So I look back and I think, my goodness, you were stupid. But, again, it's amazing what you can do. Now, I used to carry the bassinet. There was none of these fancy car seats. I used to carry the bassinet in, and if he wasn't crying, I'd stay in the class, and if he was crying, I'd go out and feed him or do something else. But, again, it's amazing what you can do if you give it a go. So then, after I'd had my second son and thought, I've got to go back to work, this is ridiculous, I'd done a bit of part-time work in TAFE and a bit of part-time work in a school. But my passion, I'd really decided my passion was computers and how they were going to change how we lived our lives, how we learnt, how we thought, and I didn't know how I was going to do it. There weren't many jobs around. And one day in the paper, you know how you scan that? Well, no, your generation doesn't. But you used to scan the paper for jobs, like scan the paper for houses. None of that happens anymore. Tiny little ad, it was no more than a centimetre high. Full-time hotline systems engineer. And I thought, well, that's not me. But I'll apply. You never know what you'll find. So my application, how the guy didn't just turf me out again. And he listened to the story of how I'd written code in Canada and how I taught. And he said, we really want a systems engineer. And I said, well, I'm not a systems engineer and I'm not ready for full-time work. So what else? And he said, let me think. And he called back and offered that I could run their training centre. And that was my introduction. Their training centre had Apple II computers, and you had special word processing and different applications for spreadsheeting, and Microsoft basically didn't exist. So that opened the door. Sometimes I had groups of teachers, sometimes I had groups of business people, but I started to learn a little bit about business. And then Apple came to Australia in late 83, and I moved over to Apple in a job that was supporting schools with computers, because that was where most of our Apple IIs went. So all of a sudden, I'm in the middle of a very commercial company. I have a passion for teaching people to use computers and get great value out of them. I wasn't quite aligned with the fact that the company wanted me to sell them, and I wanted to ensure that teachers would get the most out of them. So there was some really, really strong learning there, learning about profits and how you could calculate deals and what was likely to get signed off. And I always knew that the last week of the month or the last week of the quarter was a great time to get a good deal signed off. So over a period of 20 years, I gradually got new roles in Apple, going from part-time, very, very right at the bottom, right up to being the managing director in Australia. And people say, who did you tread on? What did you use? How did you get there? And I look back and really it was just I had a passion to learn about the business. By the time I took the job heading Apple in Australia, the only areas I hadn't worked were finance and law, which was probably a good idea because I didn't have those skill sets, and my love of finding a way around things probably needed to be held in check a little. So did I think I'd ever be CEO of Apple when I joined it 20 years before? No way. Did I see it coming as I came up the ladder? Not really. I did get a feeling that there were things I could see that we should do that weren't being done. I see things that should be done. So I was really enjoying that job. We had a fantastic team of people in Apple Australia, and we had a engagement rate of over 90%,
Wow.
which was really unheard of. And then I got breast cancer. And that is like a huge chasm in front of you. Yeah. They can't tell you if you'll survive. It wasn't good. So you don't know if you'll survive. And you really stop and say, if this is the beginning of a 2-year downward spiral, what do I want to do? What are the things I haven't done? How would I feel if I was still in this job and they came back and said, your breast cancer is now terminal? So that made me stop and think. And I made a decision after I'd finished my treatment that I would not feel I had given my body the best shot if I stayed working in such a high-pressure job. And it was high pressure, high stress, and I quit. It's probably one of the hardest things I've ever done because I loved the job, I loved the team. We were on a high. Apple was, charging back. Steve Jobs had come back to Apple at roughly the same time I became managing director. And here I was, out of work and not old enough to be finished with employment. So I started to look around, and I'd enjoyed mentoring the people within Apple. I had a lot of people who had come up through Apple into different positions across different parts of the company, and I found that fantastic. And of course, at that stage, my sons were pretty grown up, and there were a number of young women that I got to meet who were graduating or just graduated. And I realised that life was still very tough for women, educated, qualified women, going into corporate organisations. And I started looking and I thought, oh, maybe I'll do some coaching. But what I really loved was when I brought people together and we had discussions where, yes, I might have been the lead mediating the discussion, but for women to see that they could learn from other women, for women to build relationships. And that was the start of Xplore. And Xplore was the germ of an idea. I learned a lot about business, but when you're in a large company, you have your legal department, you have your finance department, you have support department, you have marketing department. And when you start your own business, you don't. None of them. They're all you.
Yeah.
And so you work out what you're going to do. And I remember, when I think of people who have changed my life, my husband sitting there over a glass of red wine, which we do, and saying, Di, you keep talking about this. What are you going to do about this? And so I took a room in the YWC. I provided wine, cheese and bickies and invited everyone I could think of who knew women who were in the kind of 20 to 35 age group to come for a presentation. And that presentation, 35 people said they would like to do the program that I'd kind of talked about. Find out about yourself, learn about what happens in organisations, how to promote yourself, how to present yourself. So that was the start. Xplore grew from there. So 20 years of Xplore, and Amanda, when you came on board some years ago, I knew I'd actually said to myself, at 70, you've got to get out. And that didn't quite work, but it did make me very focused on, as I saw different people working within Xplore facilitation or mentoring. And then you arrived, and what I could see was the person who would take over Xplore. And that took a lot of pressure away from me, that I felt there was a way of moving forward with someone who I believed had very similar passions to mine. So I'll probably stop there.
Yeah. It's so amazing, Di, your story. And I know that there'll be people that will listen to this that know you who don't know that whole story and all of those different careers that you've had, but also how the things tie together, right? So even things like you're been studying, you're degree qualified, you marry Bill and he takes the posting in the US and you can't find that first job. And then later on in your career, you end up being employed by a US company here in Australia and it's computer based. And it's so interesting how those things all weave together at all stages and to bring you to where you are. And the concept of her time, her place, you've given us some great examples of where, you were at a time and place where nothing was obvious. There was, almost like a roadblock or barrier, and you've gone, okay, what am I going to do about this? What are my choices here to drive something for me? And how that's played out well for you or taking you off onto another path, I think is really incredible. Obviously, that big moment with breast cancer, when you're kind of at the pinnacle of your career, you're the CEO of Apple Australia. My recollection is that you were the first female CEO of a tech company in Australia. So that was a brand new thing because I was a young'un back then. And so that was a big deal in the market. And then that choice that you made for what is best for me and my body, which I know a lot of, not just women, but a lot of people could relate to that, but how challenging that is. And that then started entrepreneurial pathway for you, creating Xplore, which interestingly enough we're 24 this year. So Xplore turns 25 in 2027, which is quite extraordinary. And in that time, all the women that you have touched. So that's when I first met you. I was on the other side at Deloitte in 2005. Xplore had started in 2002, and I was looking for someone to come in and partner with us at Deloitte to increase the number of females going into partnership. How do we do that? We needed a partner for that, and that's how you and I met, through Xplore. So it's interesting, these pathways. If I look at where Xplore is today, we've served about 19,000 people have gone through our programs in 24 years, which is amazing. Probably 16,000 of those have been women that have been supported by our programs. And I know that you get emails and notes like I do from women that sometimes talk to us about this thing as well, don't they, about the time and place. So can you think of any stories of any of the women you've had reach out to you where they've gone, I remember this part, the difference that you made die for me? Are there any of those moments with clients and women that you've supported?
There are definitely women my paths have crossed with them again. It's a difficult question because most of them, when they came back to me, were in a difficult position.
Yep.
One in particular was being held back by their boss, I think because they did such a good job that the boss didn't want to lose them. And so we were talking about, was there any way of bypassing that boss, getting into another part of the organisation? And then it turned out that the same boss stopped that opportunity. So then we talked about the fact that she had reached a time and a place that she had to leave that organisation. And how was she going to do it? What was she going to look for? What were the changes? And often you can find that people are also at a position where their life has also changed. Like maybe the kids have just left high school, so you've got different form of flexibility.
Yep.
Maybe they've left home, so we were able to put all the bits of their life and their career and their experience together and come up with what they were looking for.
Yep.
And at that stage, and I can think of at least 3 people now who I've talked to have been kind of at that stage. The kids have grown up and moved out and hopefully almost able to look after themselves financially, but not totally. And people have got an opportunity then to do something entirely different. They can be brave, they can be courageous. And so throwing ideas, and one of the things I often say is go and have a look and come back with 10 companies that you think would be fabulous to work for.
Yep.
Or come back and tell me about the life you'd like to be leading, which may well be a portfolio of directors. People at that stage might decide to go and take a role in a charity, not because they have less pressure, but because, they've always wanted to really return something to our society, and perhaps the financial rewards weren't as generous, but now they can afford to do something a bit different.
Yeah.
So, yes, there have been a number of people I've sat with over the times, and sometimes it can be family things going wrong. Sometimes it can be about children and the battles they have and how can they help more. So it's always helpful when there's someone older than you are who's perhaps been through that phase.
Absolutely. I'm saying wiser, not older, someone that wiser, who's been there before. But I think what's interesting with what you've shared there, Di, is a lot of women from the past that have done the programs when they have come back they're kind of at a crossroad. And I think sometimes that crossroad itself can be either they've realised that this is the time for them to do something else, or they're not in the right place, right? Like that woman that you were describing with the boss, okay? Sounds like it was absolutely her time to take on the next role and she knew that about herself, and yet there was a blocker. And unfortunately, as much as she tried to maneuver and work around that, she couldn't do that. The place just wasn't right. And so course correct, try something new and give it a go, because that's real. That happens in life. And not to say for one moment that women should have to leave an organisation to find the next thing, but the reality sometimes is when we make that, brave choice, that what we go on to do next is actually better, and unexpectedly so. Like, people do some really cool things. I'm thinking like an email that you got last year from a woman called Tammy. And you might recall this, that Tammy wrote to you. She now lives in Koh Samui. She got one of your newsletters and said, "Oh, Di, I wanted to write to you just to say how much I appreciate and, loved working with you, volunteering back in the day in the fundraising team for Dress for Success." And how terrific that was, and that it actually inspired her to become more community minded, and that when she moved to Koh Samui, she has been working with a charity over there. And so that connection that she had, and she wanted to write to you and say about the difference that you had made, and that she's now in a time and place where she's able to give back. And what's really cool about that is you forwarded me the email, and I was like, oh, I'll reach out to Tammy, because Xplore does these purpose and passion cultural trips. And this year we're going over to Koh Samui to hang out with Tammy and the Sisters on Samui, which is their charity, and to spend some time in their place supporting women there as well. So I love all of those connections and how those things come about from people being brave enough. But I also love the fact that there are people out there who come back and say, "Thank you. I wanted you to know that you made a difference in my life." So I'm curious to know, when you look back, who have been the biggest supporters in your life?
At the beginning, my father, he raised me as a young woman who could go and help him in the workshop, who he expected would go to university, and it was just a matter of what you'd be wanting to do. He was an architect, and I have a great love of architecture and renovations. And he raised me as a fully fledged person, not a young lady, and he expected I'd be a decent person and that I would have opportunities and take my life in interesting places. I guess the next person, when I got to university and started to go out with Bill, we're celebrating in a couple of months 58 years of marriage.
Amazing.
And he has been an ongoing and never wavering support. So if you can find a partner like that, it is a gift. An incredible gift. When we were in Canada, there was a fabulous principal there who took the attitude, "You'll be able to do that," because when I arrived in Canada, there were no jobs, of course, and he offered me a maternity leave replacement in physical education and health for year 12. So health was sex education. I was all of 22, and the girls were like 17 and 18, and quite seriously, many of them had a lot more experience than I did. And then I managed to break my foot teaching phys ed, playing phys ed with the students. But this principal said, "You'll be fine. Yeah, it's only for 6 months. She'll be back next year." And then they wanted to start a computer science course. And he said, "Look, what do you need to start this course?" There was no curriculum. There was no textbook. There was nothing. He said, "What do you need?" So he just exuded that confidence that I would succeed. And then in Apple, it really wasn't until Steve Vamos came on board as the head of Apple Australia, or about 5 years before I took over. And he again challenged me, and he said, "You've been in education for too long. I'm going to move you out of there, which was pretty challenging. And he said, oh, I'm going to put you heading customer support. I had to go down to the government and talk to them about what was called the Partnership for Development, which we hadn't done anything we'd promised to do. So I had to go down and try and fix that relationship. But he was prepared to just throw me into these situations. And when the job became free, I went to him and said, look, I'm not thinking of applying for this job, but I'm happy to sit on a panel to help choose. Anyway, he got down to a short list of 2, and then he said to me on a Friday, Di, I think you'd be better go away for the weekend and come back and tell me if you'll take the job. So I've always felt guilty for the 2 men that didn't get the job, but he gave me that good shove to give it a go. And of course I loved it, and I feel I was very successful at it.
Well, that's a good example of when women are in the right place, but they don't see it in themselves.
Absolutely.
Right? And how lucky are we if we are in those moments that someone else sees it and does give us that little push or big push? Because that doesn't happen all the time either, right? So that
No,
advocacy...
sometimes the answer is just taken. You know, it's like, no, you didn't want it.
Yeah.
But at that stage, he knew that I'd worked in so many areas within Apple that I had experience that nobody else who was on his shortlist could offer.
But he knew it was your time, and you didn't see that. Absolutely. And you could have pushed back and left it and waited for what, right? And I love that he gave you the weekend, like a whole 48 hours to contemplate. Well, you're a fast mover, so that would have been fine for you. So Di, thinking about everything that you've learned and experienced in your almost 8 decades on this planet, I know you're going to love that I've just shared that, but what would be some wisdom that you would leave us with? Things that maybe you know now that you didn't know then, and advice that you would give to other women coming through about their time and place. Any wisdom you want to leave us with?
Might start with the hardest one.
Yeah.
That if you believe you have a passion for children, then remember that an organisation is shaped like a pyramid, and actually it's easier to take maternity leave when you're down the bottom because there are more gaps to come back into. A lot of people say, I've got to work my job, I've got to work 10 years in the workplace before I can possibly take any time off. And if you have a passion for it, not everyone does, there comes a time that you can't change your mind. And so it's important to think of that. And this balance, life and work, both of which are very, very rewarding. So that's the first one. The second one would be, don't sell yourself short on what you can learn. One of the things when I had breast cancer, I decided I had to find something else to think about apart from Googling all the things that could go wrong. And I took up learning Italian. Now, I'd been a terrible language student at school, but it's taken me a while. But not fluent, but I could hold my ground. If someone had no English and they only had Italian, I'd be able to get along pretty well. And not only that, I thought I'll go back and have a look at French, which I had in school. And I'm stunned how much I still remember and how much the fact that once you've got one language like Italian, how much it helps. So don't sell yourself short. Just because you didn't like it at school doesn't mean, like I've started 2 years ago learning the ukulele. Well, the fact that I did a couple of years at school means at least I know what music looks like, I know what bars look like and notes look like, and it helps you learn. And you never know the skills that you pick up along the way, when they might come back and suddenly be really important in the portfolio you're developing. So give things a shot. Be prepared to accept that you will learn things, and you can learn things that are way outside what you think is your potential. Don't give up on it. And don't sell yourself short. Think of yourself with a friendly hand sitting on the middle of your back, pushing you forward and giving you that conversation to lean in to what's going on. Because you're there, it's the time, it's the place.
Yeah.
Take advantage of it.
I love that. That's sounding like self-advocacy. We have to be able to back ourselves. I'm hearing that from you as well. It's also interesting though, Di, because you have such a growth mindset at how you see the world, which is, really important for functioning well. And that curiosity, you always approach things from a lens of curiosity and that love of learning that comes through strongly. And they're some of your key strengths. I think they're such good reminders to all of us about when things are tricky, or if we're at a crossroad or we're not sure what's next, to absolutely embrace some of those attributes like you have in your career. Di, I have thoroughly enjoyed doing my first episode of Her Time and Her Place with you. I hope you've enjoyed it as well.
It's been a lovely time to just reflect.
Yeah.
And, the legacy of what you leave behind is always a challenge. I think as I hit 80 this year, what would I have done differently? I'm really pleased I balanced a career and motherhood. Wasn't easy. Sometimes I think I would have liked more time as motherhood, or I would have I don't think you ever think you'd like more time at work. Would I have liked to be more involved as a granny? But all in all, I feel that the path I have led has been very rewarding for me. I think I've left behind people who have been positively impacted by me. We haven't mentioned at all Dress for Success and the fact that that has gone from strength to strength. And it makes me so proud to think I was in on the first day on that, and that Xplore gave them the first money for the first rental, because there was no government grant, there was no big donation. And I look back and I say there's a lot of, like you mentioned the number 19,000 in Xplore. How many people has Dress for Success helped?
Absolutely. Well, I think Dress for Success Sydney, New South Wales and ACT, we are 17 years old this year, and we serve about 3,500 women a year at the moment. So let's say that that's been probably 40,000 maybe women, by the time Dress for Success hits 20 in 2029, it's probably going to be about 50,000 women across New South Wales and ACT. That's extraordinary. And once again, that impact of helping other women at a time and a place where they need support in their next employment opportunity or phase of their life. There's so many different things that you have been involved with. It's been amazing spending this time with you. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, Di. And to everyone out there who's enjoyed listening to episode 1, please keep a follow on our podcast, and you can do a bit of a rating as well. Only 5s will do. And we will have for episode 2 very shortly. Thank you.